That took a period of 4 years, of until 2021, where he started finding consistency. 2024, his first multiple seven-figure year, and then 2024, his first seven-figure month.
He is the barometer of understanding this openness to willing to change and evolve, to take the long road in having the widest possible skill set to achieve what he said, to become an all-seasons trader. What you understand to be the next evolution is often not necessarily by happenstance, but it's a product of you exploring the known fringes of your technological limitations, of your skill limitations, of your understanding limitations.
Every single one of these characters is a spare part for you to enable yourself as a holistic trader whose trading intelligence or trading sense is a function of your ability to perform across all environments and not being a monoculture edge. Bogdan, we are tackling a chapter today that we printed before our trip to the Bahamas, our high performance retreat at the end of 2024 over the Thanksgiving weekend. And the reason why we printed this chapter, because it's a chapter that covers all the essentials of what we both believe takes to become an incredible trader. So many facets, so many character facets. And this is a trader who just this past month has made 7 figures. It's actually his first 7-figure month, in excess of £1 million. And it is the Trump days. And what's even more fascinating with this trader is by reading his chapter, you're able to, if you go through it at a pace that allows for reflection, and we tackle these topics in the chapter, that allows for that quiet space in between, that you can build your tactics, your learning and your trading tactics in tackling the financial markets. And his is such a wonderful story of evolution, pretty much like The Godfather, and a trader, why we've named him student, because he is, within the financial markets, the model student. Perhaps a model student in school doesn't really portray the same qualities within the financial markets, but within this space, he is your model student that's now elevated himself and is on his path to having an 8-figure trading year. So if I were to kick it off, this is a trader who is a hybrid. As you described in chapter 1, we have the mixture, we have the Mediterranean corner, we have the Northern European corner, and he's Northern European looking, 6'3" plus, and a gentleman with the uttermost humility, which we'll tackle in that power of humility and when you're learning and you're listening. But Bogdan, if I were to ask you, for people who are reading this book, which people does this chapter serve? Which individuals will receive the most power from this chapter? And which parts or what does this chapter mean to you?
In a nutshell, Alex, I think this phrase will underpin our whole conversation and to make it clear to those who this chapter is useful for. That is this idea that limits are targets. And that doesn't mean limits are targets in a motivational sense. It's the sense that tells you where to go next. It tells you how to develop next. It tells you what to identify and work on, while being guided by something we'll discuss in the book and in these videos, by your core fascination with the markets. It's understanding that to break that old dogma of I have my edge, I've been doing this edge since the beginning of time. This is who I am, and people who may have pigeonholed themselves quite early on. Now, it's a bit of a catch-22 because this very same people will tell you that they have no issue in their trading and that they don't need to develop further. So it's sometimes there's people who break free of those clutches, but then are left of thinking, well, what the hell do I do now? How do I develop these skills? How do I teach myself these things? And so on and so forth. And I mean that both in the prop sense and for people who might be trading at home, because, as much as even in the prop scene of various educational support and social contact, it is very much understanding something we talked about, how to filter out and learn from others. But yeah, it's understanding that limits are targets, and it's exploring the known fringes of your skills. It's watching other people and understanding how they've developed and trying to go along that. And it returns to something we discussed many times, that it is to take note of the anomalous and understand how to get to there. So I don't want to say that this chapter is, to cop out of your question, Alex, to say that this chapter is for everyone. But I think truly this is one of the chapters that at every stage of development as a trader, it's one of those things. It's more of a chapter that it's mandatory rereading every month, every 6 months, every year. Every time one does their quarterly debrief, every time someone does their monthly, reviews or yearly review, it's something I think is mandatory reading to sort of self-question and create a baseline of, what would the student do in this situation? Again, the power of these characters, having them in your brain, having the warrior in your mind, the godfather in your mind, the hero, and in this case, the student. So it's all for those people. I'll put it down now, Alex. Every single person watching this right now, when you're doing your yearly debrief, your monthly, quarterly, whatever, that's the time to pick up the student.
And if we start on just the power and the art of journaling,
yes,
both the art and the science, and there are different levels of consciousness that you're trying to encode, decode. So when you in that moment and you have to recall or you have to execute and be novel in your actions, the chapter captures the essence of how he journals, his journey of journaling, from almost self-mutilation in the sense of how he would attack himself, and how he then transcended to being more objective in order to capture this awareness of himself. Now, in the chapter, we focus on how he weaponized his mind through journaling. And if I were to ask you about the nature of journaling, how traders, or in this chapter, what is it that we're trying to bring across in this chapter about journaling that so many people can perhaps, so many junior traders could be put on the wrong path? At Axia, we train you how to debrief, how to journal. But like with every skill set, journaling is a skill set. So do you just elaborate for us in the chapter, what are the key themes we're trying to touch on with regards to journaling? You even mentioned there, this ode to self, to the practice of journaling.
Journaling is one of those things in which you have to have complete and utter faith in the sense of that the payout is extremely down the line. It is very much an investment of your time and efforts, to the point where a lot of people will start discounting journaling, thinking it's ineffective. What does this give me? There's a lot of both extremely tangible and intangible benefits. And I'll segue into the next one. You're completely right. He weaponized his mind through the power of journaling. But let me recast it. He used the journal as a way to preserve his mindful, reflective state while being simultaneously active in the markets, the very same markets that seek to destroy you and push your mindful state into oblivion. That is what they do best. Every trader now who's listening to this will know exactly what I mean, in the sense of you're trading and you don't see the forest for the tree. You don't see the forest for the trees. You feel as if you're borderline intoxicated. You miss so many things, and then you take a step back. You enter a reflective state, perhaps not intentionally. In the shower or the next day, going on a walk. And everything becomes very, very clear. Now imagine having that clarity while being engaged in the markets.
Sorry, just you mentioned that Josh Waitzkin mentioned in the game of chess, and I know you're an avid chess player yourself.
Not a great one, but yes.
And he mentioned the amount of times when you make a decision, you then act. And the moment of acting, you release this tension that's pent up. And the moment you act, you only realize in that moment it was the wrong move. And so one of the methods is the ability, you're about to execute a position on the chessboard or in a trade, by writing down what your decision is, you're able to recapture, you'll be able to bring to light that moment that all of a sudden, is this a good decision? It creates that objectivity of that moment of just almost interrupting that tension where you can potentially make a false move. So if you I just want to segue in almost the neurobiological response of interrupting a decision, as opposed to when you release attention, you make the move, and then all of a sudden you realize in that moment there was the wrong move.
Yes, and actually the student says exactly this. It's like, to quote him, downloading your thoughts and feelings onto the page. And he does that in a very specific way that the book talks about. And I think it's also A, to do that, but B, it's just the ability to then step outside of yourself and observe yourself in a more third person kind of way, which is very, very difficult to do. Again, I think some traders, perhaps this is what we can pin under the nebulous, strange definition of talent, can do better than others. But journaling, in effect, is a way to unlock that power which is inherent in everyone, that reflective observational power in real time when it matters in the markets.
It's a real-time diagnostic instrument.
Yeah. So it's quite literally some kind of protective mechanism to protect yourself of the intense emotional and mental storm that you go through when you're in a trade. For you to even realize that you went through it. You know, a lot of the time it's easy to forget these kind of things when you're in the trade and then you finish and so on. So I think that's you know, I've been thinking a lot about Alex ever since we finished the students chapter, that there's the ultimate immersion of watching and being involved in markets trading. And then there's the ultimate weekend walk for 3 hours, ultimate reflection. And I think the journal is something in between. It allows you to step back while being in markets or just about to be involved in markets, deciding if you should be or not be. And I think the student has really monetized that space, like not only understands it at how to apply to his career, but also just truly, truly monetized it in active real time. And then I should, sorry, Alex, and I should note to everyone who understands what we're talking about, we're not talking about a librarian-like archiving, debriefing, which is very important, but it's a very different practice. That is when the markets have done something interesting, you archive it for later to retrieve later at a specific time. This is very much your natural observations put down on paper, your thoughts and feelings put down on paper, understanding what you want to do. It is, again, more malleable and it's very modular for each trader, but it's essentially that, for you to understand your thoughts and sort of step outside of yourself in exactly that moment and look at what you're doing.
And just on, so the student where he's perhaps pioneered is that real-time journaling to capture those unconscious thoughts that disappear into the ether and become part of your DNA, your responsive DNA on a consistent basis, where you repeat the same mistake over and over again. And so he's able to effectively, you know, as phrased in the book, error prune those elements. And so that's, you know, the aspect of journaling in real-time decision-making. Then there's the arc of, you know, when are you then journaling again? You know, post-trade. What's the methods? What are the frameworks? And those aspects of journaling truly transcends all those hidden unconscious habits that derail you. Brings it to the surface of awareness. And then from that level, you're able to understand how you navigate yourself in the markets. And from that perspective on journaling, and before we go on to a little bit of his story, because I think his story is an exciting one because it captures many moments where your career can be derailed. But just before we go there, that weaponizing your mind through your journaling, there are a couple of extracts in the book of his actual words and his journal. And I feel those extracts by themselves, you can almost reverse engineer as a junior trader, is what we would expect from all of our traders on our desk, of these subtle practices having profound effect on your trading. Do you have any more thoughts on why he's now moved himself to the highest echelon where he can have multiple six-figure days?
Because he had the humility enough to capture himself at his worst on paper, I think. And
then that's a reference Bible for later on.
Yes. And very rarely does anyone do that. And I'll be very explicit here. I know for myself, just stepping outside for myself, both in trading and in every endeavor I do, is that I naturally forget pain very easily. And by doing this, I also then forget all the little details and things that led me to make the thing that created frustration or a mistake or something that I just keep doing. So it's kind of like photographing all the bad things which your brain will forget very quickly. Even if it's 2 days later, you'll forget all the negative self-talk that took you to do that action, either through lying to yourself, but that sounds kind of harsh, or just basically your mind doesn't cast back to it. And then I think a lot of people do that. Again, the warrior, I think, doesn't do that. I think he remembers all the pain and all the suffering and all the things. So
because
it's easy
his
for him
experience
to
is
do
much
it.
more embodied, right?
Yes.
And yeah.
Yes. Whereas I think someone on my side loves to just take a shovel and then push it further down and forget about it, kind of thing. So the journal at the moment in time captures captures warts and all. And he truly had the humility and the openness to be willing to stare that in the face. And as you said, and as you alluded to, Alex, in the beginning, he was still he had in the prototype early days of his journal, without realizing, writing things down, he was very extremely harsh to himself. He even says, I didn't notice this, my wife did. And she was saying, look at all the self-abuse you go through, And then that allowed him to understand how to develop his journaling practice further, where now it has specific objectives of what he wants to capture, but it ultimately boils down to downloading his thoughts and feelings in real time on the page. And it's interlocked. So to answer your question about how he's grown next level, that then allows him to monetize. He's already monetized this sort of fast finger, reactive to news trading kind of part of him. Because remember, he's very much a hybrid all seasons trader. But the next part of what he really wanted to evolve into was this, again, I use the word I hate the most, a technical trader, i.e. a trader who has an explicit framework of operation, which happens to be market profile, chart patterns, and so on. To develop those skills, which require more of a systems to step back, understand what's going on kind of approach. And that built onto the other leg, which is this very real-time reflection in journaling. So they're kind of like an inseparable arch that was proven time and again. It was proven with the engineer who swears by this practice. And it's proven, proof in the pudding with the hero. The hero himself said his biggest edge was his ability to reflect. The moment that was gone is when his entire career collapsed. And when it came back, lo and behold, his career was resurrected. And you can see how, again, the student is an example of that in just a slightly different iteration.
Now, just before we go into his backstory, which I think there's so many key learning points, probably want to tackle one or two more things. And for people reading this chapter, let's describe the character of the individual from the perspective of humility and the art of listening. Mm-hmm. What is your experience when you interviewed him, when you sat down and you describe it in the book? What's your experience in order to describe to the viewers, to the readers of the student?
He's the kind of person who seems so open and willing to understand and think through what I'm saying. This little old me, young buck of all people, to the point where I was kind of worried what I was saying. I was like, man, I really got to be careful what I'm saying here, just in case somehow he takes it on so seriously. And then it made me realize the power of, he could really maybe, that's how open he was. You feel that with a lot of people, but it was extremely pronounced in him, to the point where when you said this is a big feature of him, I didn't need to know anything more, because I was thinking exactly the same things. He is the kind of person, he's calm, collected. When you meet him, he has a very serene exposure. He wouldn't probably think this of himself. He's probably laughing to himself when we say these things. But from the outsider's perspective, I really see it. And it's on a relative scale, compared to the intensities of other forceful and active personalities on the floor. So, and he is the best example of that.
Now, just one of my most, and I've always mentioned this to our junior traders, when you speak to the student, as you mentioned, he looks at you and he pierces your eyes, but he pierces them with an openness of someone who's going to receive your message with much, enjoyment, curiosity. And so when he asks a question, as opposed to some traders asking a question just to receive the result of what they actually want to tell you. Yeah. It's almost an ego question. Mm-hmm. His questions come from such a source of humility, such a backdrop of a true quench for this knowledge. When a coach, a mentor, his equal, someone younger, someone more experienced speaks to him, and he's asking them a question, because he greets you with such an open heart of being inquisitive, the person who's delivering the message to the student seems so much more at ease, and therefore he empowers the person to give the best of themselves. Mm-hmm. As opposed to when someone asks you a question, they ask you a question with eyes of distrust, potentially, not seeking, almost, cynicism. And you might know that they might interrupt you. And because he doesn't do any of these, he creates this environment for the person delivering the message with this complete comfort. And therefore, our coaches feel confident to deliver their best messages. So he's always receiving the very best because of his demeanor in front of others. Mm-hmm. And, as you mentioned, I just wanted to, did you ever experience that with him?
Absolutely. And understanding where he's come from his career has made it all the more impressive. And this is what really shocked me. And again, he is the barometer of understanding this openness to willing to change and evolve. Considering, and probably this is a good way to segue into understanding his background, Alex. He came both as a spread trader. Mm-hmm. Actually, his origin story as a trader mirrors The Godfather. But both as a spread trader, meaning there's a lot of dogma around how outright trading is not possible and it's all like luck and no edge and et cetera, et cetera. And also from an environment where, the very idea that someone could be putting on a big trade on any kind of, air quotes, technical trade, on chart patterns, on market levels, is also like, if you would have said this was borderline heretical, get laughed out of the room kind of mentality. So for someone to come in immersed in that kind of culture and ideals, to then do a whole 180 and double down on understanding, becoming an outright trader from a spread trader, and then not being stuck in like, okay, the only thing I can do in outrights is this. Actually, there's a whole open field. To also have the foresight, Alex, to then say, I'm going to now take the investment in my career and probably hold myself back and take on these very frustrating frictions of understanding this weird nebulous idea of, understanding a framework, understanding the profile, understanding how everything connects, to take the long road. To take the long road in having the widest possible skill set to achieve what he said, to become an all-seasons trader, where no matter what market environment, no matter what edges, again in air quote, difficult term, is in play, he can do very, very well. And that right now is really starting to pay off this year. Like it's really coming to its own. And as you mentioned, he is up a very significant amount this month. But the crucial thing there, he will keep so much of it, like nearly all of it. And what shocks me is not his ability to make, but his ability to keep. And that is extremely pronounced. And remember, you said it yourself, Alex, we always talked about this idea that the marker or the milestone on the road to mastery, one of the very first, is the ability to consolidate P&L. And you mentioned that in a sport context, in like tennis and so on, and it applies so much in terms of trading as well, trading P&L.
And so now, going back into his backstory now, and I think as we explore his backstory, we'll explore one of the key, we'll lead that into one of the key themes called the adjacent possibles, which we'll tackle as we start his backstory. Now, this is a trader who started like The Godfather on a spread desk at the same firm. And when he started, I think started
after the financial crisis, roughly around 2011-ish, depending. Yeah. So,
and when he started, it was post the blowout of the TED strategy. TED traders were no longer licking their wounds; they were out the game.
The Treasury Eurodollar spread, for those who are not familiar.
And this strategy, he was just about to leave on some backpacking, and he received this opportunity. Mm-hmm. And he was about to trade on another strategy called the gas spreads. And because he was going on holiday, serendipitously, he missed that boat. All of those traders absolutely collapsed through the strategy. And he made a comeback on the TED spreads. And this was generation 2.0 on TED, who were able to now, for the first time, take the lessons from their forefathers on understanding how other asset classes can influence the TED, peripheral bonds, movements across the bond complex internationally, and understanding the interplay between global events, macro news, and the TED. And isn't that just the most fascinating thing, where you see an expiry of an entire generation of traders, and then the birth of a new crop, and their new reality, their new so-called world order? Well, this is just the way it is. But to take an old TED spread trader, evolving through their time, sometimes it becomes incredibly challenging. So here's a trader who then, in a fairly short period of time, him and his team, there are a few people who dropped out, were able to navigate and perform on the so-called end of the TED spread, even during the ages rates started getting crushed. If you're enjoying this discussion about the student, one of the traders in Traders of Our Time, and you want to go deeper, head over to tradersofourtime.com to sign up and get chapter 1 for free. You'll stay in the loop with exclusive content, insights, and updates, and you'll be among the very first to read the book when it launches on March 27, 2025. So this leads on to this backstory in him that I wanted to understand news, macroeconomic trading. He leveraged the TED. So how was he going to go from point A to point B, use the door metaphor, adjacent possibles, landing in the right place? Do you want to just expand a little bit more on this journey of the student?
Look at it in reverse, and this is an interesting question. Let's say the student goes back in time, meets his former self, and unloads everything he knows onto his younger self. That younger self will absolutely not be able to make heads or tails or understand anything he is saying for a very long time or at all. And why is that? Because quite literally, he would be too far ahead of his time. And it's basically understanding that, especially the wide repertoire of skills needing to become what the student has become, this all seasons, both adept at trading macroeconomic news, like, smashing things, or, trading very long-term in play market profiles, structural plays, and so on. The wide repertoire just has so many connecting dots, so many things need to connect, and you have to understand everything so deeply before you can move on to the next one. And often, again, one feeds adjacently into the other. So within, as I said in the introduction, Alex, a lot of the book is making explicit what a lot of people will find implicit. And we often use various books that that resonated with us a lot. And one of these was the Stephen Johnson's Where Good Ideas Come From. And Johnson talks a lot about this term, or you can use it as a framework, or if you will, the adjacent possible, where it's all about understanding that not even one skill set, but understanding how technology evolves. There's so much like adjacent component parts needed to go on to the next stage. Of course, what is known as the next stage, you only know by looking backwards. You don't know that it's the next stage. What you understand to be the next evolution is often not necessarily by happenstance, but it's a product of you exploring the known fringes of your technological limitations, of your skill limitations, of your understanding limitations. And this is what I meant by limits or targets. You only get there and understand where to evolve next by exploring the known fringes of your world. It's not by staying in your own little island where you know how to do one thing really, really well. It's by understanding, okay, you know what? This whole side of me, this technical trading, I don't know anything about it. But what's beyond the pale? There could be a gigantic edge there. Maybe it'll take me 5 years, but that could make me a whole new trader. And indeed, it's remade many traders, and gloriously so, the student himself. And so the adjacent possible is one for people to understand. There's a diagnostic element of it. Is there anything preventing you from exploring your adjacent possible? Is it because there's no one to learn from? So you can't add all these boundaries that were perhaps completely unknown? Perhaps do you have pride, too much pride and too much ego, the opposite of humility, to stop you from exploring your adjacent possible? And so on and so forth. So that kind of, from Stephen Johnson's book, that concept just works in so many ways. Diagnostically, it's also just understanding like that's how skills actually develop, not in a very linear fashion. And somehow you can just jump for you to say, oh, show me what the warrior does, and I will just basically copy him tomorrow. Show me what the engineer does, and I'll just copy him tomorrow. Like the engineer said, if you can tell someone your edge in 5 minutes, is it really an edge, right? If you can systematize it, is it really an edge? And so on and so forth. Hence, this thing we mentioned before, that often the more depth the trader has in their trading, in their repertoire of skills, they will very often struggle to actually explain to you the so-called edge in quotation marks. And I often attach quotation marks to it is because often new traders regard edge as this regarded as a one skeleton key answer to everything that will unlock everything now and forever, as if the answer to a mathematical question rather than a wide skill set to explore a complex environment, which the markets are. So I explored the adjacent possible in a rather adjacent way, Alex. Excuse the thing, but I think that probably gives people a feeling of how you can utilize this concept usefully. And to wrap up, someone might ask me, well, that just creates so much mess, so many problems. Well, let me tell you something. The experience of creating something new and unique, is the experience of friction. A path too smooth is far too trodden. By their very nature, every single trader that worked themselves up to a 7 and an 8-figure P&L, or especially when you reach the 8+ figure range, they're very unique traders. Imagine the immense friction they experienced throughout their development to get to that stage, because they're on the path of creating something unique and endurable and a very unquantifiable edge that just gives them that uniqueness. So that is perhaps a sort of salvo to those who, maybe starting off in the game and are just addicted to finding the answer, the secret, the algorithmic right answer, Alex. So that is perhaps I think at a high level how I will describe the adjacent possible. It goes deeper into the book, but yes, how do you?
Yeah, when we explore the adjacent possible and interfacing that with his journey and with his career. So this is a trader who started on the TED, understood how the TED was reacting to news, but wanted to trade the news in a more outright fashion, didn't have the community around him to be able to transcend that space. He then joined The Godfather on his team, I think circa 2013, learned the fly, Bun Bobble Shats, another so-called butterfly spread. But still there was these adjacent possibles or spare parts that he needed to acquire, that sometimes you could have all the curiosity, but none of the resources to mine in order to get you to that next stage. So that walkabout journey was a long journey for him. That point B, or that end game, to trade news, macro, understand its influence on global asset classes, trade in an outright form, needed this journey of acquiring these so-called spare parts, the adjacent possible, to arrive at this forever-ending destination. And so his journey, being starved of the spare parts, being curious, I don't know, it's Nietzsche, and that curiosity without obsession is just something that just becomes surface level. You could be incredibly curious about a million things and never advance in any manner or in any means. But if you're curious with obsession, the discovery becomes much, much deeper. So here's a trader who went from one team, and then he was caught on his own for a period of time. He had a shattering moment where he lost money on account in a team that he was in. And when he transcended and he arrived at the Axia door, and this was his now moment of, from the TEDs 2011 to 2017, to now have access to the spare parts, the adjacent possibles that could elevate him. And this is important, of creating that ecosystem of vitality, and the ecosystem in this context of the book, those adjacent spare parts. And he then surrounds himself around this new group and crew of traders that we speak about throughout the book and in chapter 1. And that took a period of 4 years, of until 2021, where he started finding consistency, 2022, where he started having multiple 7-figure months, 2024, his first multiple 7-figure year, and then 2024, his first 7-figure month. And that journey of moving through, there were moments of friction that you mentioned earlier on, of him, and we mentioned this in the book, that to make a change when you're growing or ahead is much more powerful than making a change when you're behind. And so he was making money still from the spreads, but he was wanting to make that leap of faith into an environment that he didn't quite understand, into the outright environment. But there was something happening all the time. Do you want to elaborate what was going on in his career in the early days of him being stuck in something, was trying to learn something else?
It was two things, Alex. One is this: he even says, the ego got the better of me. I thought I could be different and be trading both the spreads and both the outright. And as you said, it became a crutch that he was still having positive P&L from his spreads and loss making in the outrights while he was learning. And he didn't want to forgo the cookie jar, very understandably so. That, again, shall we say, is diagnostic of him unwilling to explore further the adjacent possible. So again, how the model can be used for that sense. deeper later into his trading, when he actually was starting to become profitable trading outright and developing his strategies, there was now another problem, again a very human problem, where he felt a lot of anguish, guilt, view of himself as a trader, meaning that he wanted to give back and become and join either the police or the military and so on and so forth, which he was prevented from doing so actually because of failing physical tests. He had a very active sporting life before, and that caused him a lot of injuries. But essentially, he wanted to make enough, and when he made enough, he would quit. And yes, and that now, which might seem to those obvious, might seem obvious to those listening right now. But again, we've stepped outside of him. We're analyzing him in the third person, and of all the things that are obvious to you now, insidiously so, they're not obvious to you at the time, obviously, otherwise there would have never been a problem in the first place. So that created a very strange feedback loop for him, where it didn't align with incentives to keep growing. It didn't align with incentives to keep studying and pushing. It created a very sort of short-term mentality. And until that was flushed away from his system, he had a lot of conversations with yourself and one of the Axia mentors.
Eric.
Yes. Who he credits very strongly for developing his technical side with Eric Juice. That, again, prevented him from developing further. So both of these things, letting go of this spread trading crutch, and then later on this guilt of being a trader, and also this, I want to make X and then I will quit. And once those two barriers were taking off, the shackles were taking off, then he truly started to ascend very quickly afterwards,
Yeah, and just to go deeper into that, because for anyone who's watching this video or reading that chapter, what we're truly trying to illustrate here is, and his was potentially an extreme case. He wanted to be a policeman or a public servant or a fireman. He felt he wanted to give back to his community. And he had that timeline, as you mentioned. But just think on that timeline, when you are moving close towards that timeline and the markets do not give you the opportunity sets, and you're not receiving that P&L of what you want to achieve in that timeline, the pressure builds up and the learning and the performance is forgoed. Mm-hmm. Because all of a sudden you're forcing, and as you draw close to this timeline, so any timeline creates an expectation, and when there's these high expectations, your resilience capacity just falls off a cliff. And so that's truly essential, is if you have a certain timeline, or next year I want to make this X amount of P&L, and as Stan Druckenmiller says, be competitive for the opportunity set. Mm-hmm. For which you have a skill or an edge in. And if you fail that with that opportunity, being competitive with the opportunity set, there's no opportunity set, and you're trying to achieve a certain P&L goal that's rather lofted and of a high target, you're just going to set yourself up for disappointment and true underperformance. Mm-hmm. And so, moving on from that moment in his career and his development, this chapter, again, for, that power of journaling, this journey of acquiring skills, imagine the psychology that goes through most people when you're in an environment, you're stuck from achieving your goals, that you're having to make these constant little leaps of faiths and occasional movements. And during those times are all these questioning. But the one common denominator amongst all of these 10 traders is their cultish belief and their trust that they will get there. And do you just want to, share one of the themes about this no plan B?
Quite literally, if you have a plan B, the market will manifest it. It's a fork, if you will, of the eternal quote by Ed Seykota, that the market will always give you what you want. And we've seen this every single time. And so many traders were forced to either give up plan B or were pushed into a moment where they had to decide. And, they took the route of not entertaining plan B. It is a forcing function. And you see, this is what the perverse thing is, Alex, speaking of timelines. If you have a mental timeline or goal of P&L, it will negatively affect you. But at the same time, you need a sense of finality to get in gear, but you can't also accept plan B.
Absolutely.
And this comes up again and again and again in so many chapters. It's the way the collector finishes, his chapter finishes. Him saying that no matter what happens, he's never questioned this ability that he will not be trading. And it's kind of like, not within the realms of possibility, you know, and that there is no such thing as a plan B, and there will be constant evolution, and it'll keep changing and pushing through. And I think that just permeates not just their belief, like overall as traders, but how it feeds into their ability to know that their best years are always ahead, that they will work for their best years. It won't just be given to them. And that will still require a lot of development, which they can't foresee yet, but will be required to do. And I'll also want to caveat, Alex, for all this, you know, we were talking about these psychological leashes that the student had. That is not to say that there was absolutely no skill development at all. In fact, there was deep skill development at this time. I think one thing a lot of beginner traders, especially from the retail world, fall into is this concept that there's no such thing as skill or edge. It's just a psychological game, which cannot be the case. There's something, if you want to put it a bit more crudely, the psychological things have to come towards the end of the journey, not towards the beginning. It's not like you can will yourself into becoming a infinitely profitable trader just by switching your mentality the next day or something like that, if you have absolutely zero skills and zero understanding. So just to clarify that. Alex, one thing I would like to briefly mention is something we go very deep into the book many times, but I think it's very important to mention now. Another concept we bring up in the students chapter is this antagonism of learning and performing. Extremely crucial for traders at all stages, extremely crucial for those who need to reinvent and learn new skill sets. Sometimes it's even harder doing so rather than going from scratch. The antagonism of learning and performing is quite simply that all the best practices and habits and reflexes you develop as a learner can often be the worst as a performer, and vice versa. It is your ability to receive widely versus your ability to be like, okay, I'm listening, but actually I'm going to follow through on this and I'm going to now perform, and so on and so forth. So we talk a lot about how that manifests in many ways in the book. I don't want to get into it too deep now. But it is a very difficult process where, again, to transform you need to be a very good learner to become a performer, but then as a performer, you need to forego a lot of the habits that you developed as a learner. That doesn't mean you should not do those things, but it's a different weighting on what's important or what's not. And we use that because the student experienced this very same thing. We saw that again with the Godfather, both of them having to go from performers as spread traders, back into learners, and then become performers once again. And navigating that is extremely difficult. You can't get around the crossroads or the antagonisms of learning and performing. Believing you can is also part of their trick. It's something, again, a lot of this concept is probably the perfect example. A lot of people watching right now will probably know this quite implicitly, but it's just making something very explicit that we've seen time and time again, something I've suffered through as well as a trader. I mean, we all do by definition of going from learning to performing. And that's why I think this is one of the things that makes the student such an important read many times throughout your entire trading journey, reviewing it quarterly. To understand, have I perhaps overweighed? Am I trying to think too much of a performer here when actually I should forego these things and just think 100% more as a learner? That means certain focuses on different things. Another one, Alex. When someone is a learner, they can put all their emotions and thoughts onto the page in like how the student does it, but it won't be as effective as just doing hardcore archive, like debriefing, breaking down, reverse engineering parts of the market. When you're a deep core performer and your skill set is very wide, you don't need to break down things so like a learner would on their day one. You still do, perhaps very pinpoint specific things. But what becomes important then is this 90% of the time, reflective ability transmuted through a journal. And often people get that mixed up. And it's very important to make that very explicit where, a performer might tell you the best things he is doing to perform, and that is completely right. And the learner might also tell you the best things he's doing to learn, and that they are completely right. But out of context, that becomes very dangerous if you don't realize the context at which you're listening to that advice or practices or so on and so forth. And again, that's just one example of the things we get onto with the student.
So I wanted to reiterate again, is Pierre is a trader that has taken pretty much like the engineer, or very similar to the engineer. They have different methods that fit them uniquely, similar to the hero. And reading this chapter, you're going to have a deep sense of how you can go about innovating your journaling game. because your journaling game is the foundation for your growth, your compounding, your improvement, how far you can get into this game, how you attack these learning performance goals, your adjacent possibles from the journaling. And so through reading this chapter of the student, you're going to see an entire new world landscape and understanding of the power of journaling in the financial markets. And as we close off near the end of this, at the end of this video now, your understanding of how two very similar traders, Godfather, when I mention similar in their birthing.
Yes.
You know, how they started and the strategies. And if you were to take them at a point in time and you just put a 2-degree difference on their journey, there's quite a profound different path later on. You know, they both start in one area, but then they can both finish successfully in completely two different areas. Do you just want to finish off, or we close off on why that happens?
It is something the hero mentioned often, and I think it's very wise advice for learners. It is understanding what your core fascination is with the markets. That is your North Star when you sail the seas of the unknown adjacent possible, when you push beyond the pale and you try and explore. Often, again, friction is the experience of creation. You'll have a lot of circuitous routes, dead ends. Why the hell am I doing this kind of rabbit hole moments? What am I even doing? What is all this? It is always coming back to core fascination and understanding what keeps bringing you back to the markets, because I think a lot of people have intuitive understanding that there's always edge there. For example, the hero just knew his core fascination was the pure action on the price ladder. That then let him understand how you can trade through order flow, then understand how you can integrate all this into the market profile, which is for him order flow on a longer time frame. For the student, it was, you know, how the hell do I learn all this? How do I get from there to there? How do I even become an all seasons trader? You know, when he started on the TEDs, he was like, okay, I want to learn macroeconomic news. How do I get from there to there? So he always had an implicit core fascination with understanding news and implementing news into his game. And I would even argue after he ticked that box, he dug a bit deeper and understood that he also has this core fascination with developing a structured framework that became the market profile. And that then let him choose at every juncture in the road, while exploring his adjacent possible, where to go next. While the Godfather, you know, used a lot of his super niche skills as a spread trader and always leveraged much more with, you know, that multi-market volatility chasing, headline hitting. That, both of them though, are a product of also influence of those around them. Because the Godfather sat next to the warrior and the student sat next to the engineer, who are templates of both. So do you see then, using that specific phrase, the spare parts, you know, Johnson mentions this on in his book, and we relay that information in Traders of Our Time, that a lot of, you know, the pure learner has to basically start putting as many spare parts on the table. You have to draw from many sources, trading and not trading. And in his case, the Godfather was putting many of the warrior's spare parts on his table. The student was doing the same with the hero and the engineer, who are market profile framework operators. And then he learned how to combine those spare parts in his own unique way, and then iterated where they both became, you know, very different traders. And that's what you want. That is what you want as a trading floor, as a mentality, as developing. Because again, coming back to this unique thing, that the most unique traders will be the most enduring traders. And they will be able to self-sustain their learning and direction forwards. Coming full circle, Alex, that is essentially the whole point of the book, that we've seen this evolution from this understanding of the industry where someone's just given a strategy, a market, okay, trade that, and if you're not trading that, you should just wash out because your career's over, to understanding that it's all about the metagame, the meta learning principles, learning how to learn and navigating all these kind of things. So the trader can then become their own unique iteration, to the point where what they will do next will be unpredictable. It'll be unpredictable to them as much as it will be unpredictable to us observing on the outside. Because if you can't predict where they're going to go, that's probably not the best situation to be in. Because they're following a path that's been much too trodden, too smooth, there's no friction. And Where does the incredible bounty lay beyond the pale because it's explored territory, you know?
And so the true edge, and you'll be able to decipher from the chapter, lays in your ability to create these novel connections or novel acquisitions of these spare parts within an ecosystem that's diverse in edge. And so if you're acquiring the spare parts of the warrior, of the hero, of the godfather, of the raiser, of the adventurer, of the collector, and that's essentially what this book is about, is how do you create that so-called bionic trader? And by reading all of the 10 chapters, you are connecting into these wealth of spare parts that enables the core. And for me, that's what the student has done successfully. And any trader who will be reading this book is every single one of these characters is a spare part for you to enable yourself as a holistic trader whose trading intelligence or trading sense is a function of your ability to perform across all environments and not being a monoculture edge, but a real perennial edge that survives all seasons.
Absolutely. And Alex, that is again perfectly. That is that is one way to represent the multitudes that we were trying to achieve with the book, and it's also preserving these spare parts for the generation of traders that will come, you know, on the Axia desks or whoever. And it's also, shall we say, even if it's a trader not on the Axia desks, it is for the human discretionary trader of the future to show, like the book begins, your very thesis that, you know, at the worst predicted demise of the human trader was actually a resurrection of the human trader and their subsequent thriving. Because another way to join these spare parts, another way to label that process is creativity. And doing that in your own unique way is creativity. And that is your ultimate moat, is your ultimate ability to separate yourself from others, other human competitors, shall we say, and the non-human actors now that are seemingly predicted to be the only actors, and that is very much not the case. That is very much the human mode and the best of the human ability. So why not understand it and double down on it rather than treating your trading career as if you're no better than an algo or a single-use tool that can just be discarded tomorrow.
And it comes, again, that full round circle to multiplicity in performance and edge. And again, for me, this chapter, I've read it over and over again. I know we prescribe this chapter to many of our traders who are on, you know, different journeys. And for those who are watching this, enjoy this chapter. But if you're waiting for this chapter, you have to wait till the 27th of March, 2025. But in the meantime, you can go to tradersofourtime.com, download chapter 1, where you get a brief snippet of the student, but also all 9 of the other traders. And so that's for free download, so you can get a taste of what you expect on Traders of Our Time.
Alex, thank you.
Thank you, Bogdan.